Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics podcast. My name is Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics. And by here, I mean PCI Community Meeting in Europe. We're actually here in Dublin. Very excited about this opportunity to be able to talk to people who are here speaking and presenting and sharing their information with all of the people here at the conference. And John Elliott, who we've had on this podcast before. Super excited to get to talk to you. For people who haven't heard of you before, who haven't listened to some of the previous podcasts, will you please tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. John Elliott, I do a number of things. So I write training courses for a company called Pluralsight, which is based just up the road from where SecurityMetrics is based in Utah.
True.
Sunny Utah. And I'm also a security advisor at a European company called Jscrambler. And we do stuff that prevents skimming attacks. Which
is the reason that I wanted to talk to you today, because anybody who knows the change from 3.2.1 PCI DSS 3.2.1 to PCI DSS 4.0, one of the biggest changes there is the skimming attacks. But I thought maybe we should frame it a little bit differently because people have probably heard a little bit about it. Let's put it in a slightly different context and make it bigger than just PCI.
Definitely.
Starting with how do people lose data in the first place? What are these data leakage methods?
That's a great question. And like probably when we both started in the industry, people used to steal data by hacking into companies and stealing data from the company. Mm-hmm. But increasingly, we've seen data leaking out from people's browsers directly to somewhere else. And really, also the way we build websites has changed. Like in the olden days, like a few years ago, if I wanted my website to take some input and then go to an API and look something up, maybe I'm doing shipping calculation costs or customs duties or interstate taxes or something like that. I'd get all the data back to my website, my own web server. Yeah. I'd call a number of different APIs. I'd put up some intelligence there, and then I'd render a page back to the browser. That's how people used to build web services. Nowadays, all that intelligence is often in the consumer browser. And the consumer browser will talk to a number of different API endpoints on the internet to provide that interactive application to the user, which means that we're now putting JavaScript into our browsers from a number of different sources, many of which are not ours. We don't own them.
Right.
They're from, if I'm feeling uncharitable, people we don't know and never have met and randomly decide to trust to put JavaScript in our customers' browsers on our website. And this has led to a number of different problems. I talked about this at RSA conference earlier this year.
Right.
And really I categorize them in three different ways. The first way is, let's take advertising and marketing networks. A lot of people have their JavaScript in their in their web pages, which is running in the customer web browsers. Sometimes it will be still called a pixel, like Meta or Facebook still call theirs a pixel. Because originally to track people between websites, you used to put an image tag. It was IMG SRC equals something at Facebook, question mark with a unique ID. So it was like a query string on an image request. And that was the way of being able to track somebody across multiple domains. And it also allowed them to put a cookie on your...
That's a really good explanation because a lot of people say, well, how can a pixel track me?
Yeah.
But that explanation, I think, should be comprehensible to a lot of people.
And that's how it used to work. But then JavaScript became widely deployed everywhere. And so even the Meta pixel is no longer an IMGS. It's no longer an image file. It is a piece of JavaScript, but it's still called a pixel. And a few other people still call their bits of tracking JavaScript pixels because that's what the industry uses. And so we have a number of different bits of JavaScript running in our browser, on our website.
Right.
That are designed because they're advertising and marketing and tracking systems to do just that. And so they tend to be data harvesters. In other words, they try and suck as much information as they can out of the page to build a broad profile of the user, to do data enrichment so they can target advertising at you much better. And this is great until it's not great. So let me give you some examples of where this has gone wrong. And I'm going to be generous because sometimes I think this is people not understanding the business model of advertising and tracking and marketing is to get as much data as possible.
It's the whole purpose.
So when you stick their code on your website, you should assume they're going to try and take as much data as they can, rather than assuming it'll be fine. So there are two big cases last year in the States that I want to talk about. And Jen, keep me honest here, because I'm an English person, and I try not to talk about US regulation too often, because I might make a mistake.
Okay, but also, I am not an attorney, and so I can tell you how I understand regulations as a security professional.
Yeah.
So we'll both kind of feel around the edges and hope we get it as accurate as possible.
I guess at this stage I should say if you need legal advice, you should talk to an attorney in your own state.
Sad that we have to say that every time.
But just in case.
But true, yeah.
So the first is, and these are there's three breaches, three things I want to talk about really. The first is in healthcare in hospitals.
Yes.
There was some research done last year by an organization called Let There Be Light. Brilliant not-for-profit organization that is a patient advocacy group. And they did some research with a magazine called The Markup, a website called The Markup, as to was there any health data, protected health data, leaking due to the use of these advertising and tracking pixels.
Right, okay.
But it really is worth going through. And they tracked a lot of hospital websites where you went to make an appointment.
Right.
And the hospital website had the metapixel on it, the Facebook metapixel. Not a pixel, piece of JavaScript.
Right.
And it took information about, for example, what condition you were wanting an appointment for. And that went back to Meta's database.
Yeah.
But that was protected healthcare information, PHI.
Right.
And it was defined as a breach of HIPAA.
And it should be.
And two things happened. One is people started getting advertising for what I'm going to call non-regulated healthcare products, like oh, you probably have an enlarged X, right? This herbal remedy can fix enlarged X's, right? Because the algorithm, right? It's all
because
done by
of all that
because
data
all that
was
data.
taken in,
Absolutely,
that should not have been taken in,
Right.
gave them far too much information about a person's medical condition.
And some people, especially if they've got things that look like they might be terminal, are actually quite desperate for anything that might extend their life or reduce their pain.
Yeah.
And so they're very vulnerable people at that stage with this advertising being targeted at them.
Right.
So that's a bad thing for humanity.
Yeah.
The second thing is that the Department of Health and Human Services, that's right, isn't
Yes,
it?
HHS.
HHS was alerted to this, and and it's like, was this a HIPAA breach? And they were really clear. They put some very strong guidance on their website.
Yeah.
This is a HIPAA breach.
Absolutely.
Right? If you want to share data with advertising or marketing networks, they need to be now. I have to get this right. Business partners.
Yes, business associates is the
right.
name, and so the business associate, you have to have a signed agreement with the business associate. Although the nature of the business that they do makes them a business associate, not the signed agreement. But the other thing is, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to have a business associate, and so it's okay to share data. No, they have to have a reasonable, take part in a reasonable activity in the treatment of a patient, not just, oh, we're going to sign this with them, and so suddenly it falls correctly under the law. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. So HHS said, I mean, you could share data with these people as long as it met the security rule and the privacy rule, and they were a business associate.
Yeah.
Three things that you would never be able to fulfill based on just giving it away for marketing purposes.
Exactly.
So a number of hospitals got enforcement action taken against by HHS.
Right.
There are still a number of court cases going through from patients who were affected by this breach.
Right.
So that's the first thing, and we're not talking about criminal actors or bad actors here. We're effectively talking about a misconfiguration of the pixel. A piece of JavaScript.
Yeah. Well, and misconfiguration, whether it was because they chose not to read the law or misinterpreted the law or were unaware that the information that they were gathering was in some way affected by a law. And I know that the number of regulations potentially applicable to an e-commerce site, which basically this was, you can't. it can be difficult to know all of the information.
Totally.
And so you've got a developer and you've got the marketing team saying, hey, give us this info. And the developers go, yeah, we've got this little piece of code. You can gather all of that.
Yeah.
And so at some point, training didn't happen or communication didn't happen. But like you said, misconfiguration. I
think there's two things. Firstly is that a lot of these advertising and tracking JavaScripts are being added to website not by IT or information security.
Yeah.
They're being added by the marketing and digital departments,
Right.
often through something called a tag manager. Now, tag manager is a really interesting term. And a tag manager is a way of and a tag is another piece of JavaScript. So let's call it a piece of JavaScript manager.
Right.
And a piece of JavaScript manager, they come from Google Tag Manager and CISA and Adobe. And most marketing and digital departments will use them because you embed the tag manager's JavaScript in your website. And then when the tag manager loads, it goes off to the tag manager home and says, what other bits of third-party JavaScript should I load?
Right.
So it allows marketing to add JavaScript to your website without worrying the developer.
Right.
Or as you and I might put it, being security professionals, completely bypassing any change control and security procedures you might have in place.
Sure.
It's a brilliant way of getting IT and information security out of the JavaScript management of the website.
And just the language that's used there, tag manager, if you don't know what that is and you're part of some business leader that is approving this, you might think, oh, they're just putting hashtags on our social media content. That's not what this is at all.
Absolutely. So tag manager is a way of somebody putting any random JavaScript from people you've never met who you absolutely trust not to steal all the information from your website onto your website.
I don't know. That seems a little risky.
But that's where we are, Jen. That's where we are in the market, and I don't think I don't think there's any way of going back from that. So let's think about, like, is it a misconfiguration, or is it just people not understanding that the job of marketing and advertising tracking is to get as much data as possible, and therefore you need to treat it with caution rather than just treat it with abandon. So can I tell you about another healthcare breach?
Absolutely.
And this one I find really interesting because it affects non-HIPAA covered entities. So a couple of them were for abortion advice websites, for prescriptions, an online prescription company. None of this is HIPAA covered data, and they're not HIPAA entities.
And a lot of people get confused about this because they think all healthcare in the U.S. is protected health information, but it's not. It's health information that is related to specific transactions that are related to insurance. Now, if you wanted to be cynical about it, you could say it's to prevent insurance fraud. And a lot of people think it's a privacy law. We call it a privacy law, and yes, there are elements of privacy there, but the main focus did not come from the protection of individual privacy, which would, take and make it applicable to health data across the board.
Absolutely.
But HIPAA data is about insurance data. So there are people who are like, well, we aren't covered by HIPAA, so we can use this information in any way we like. We don't have protected information.
It might not be protected by HIPAA, but there is another rule run by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which is the health data rule, or health data breach rule, I think it's called. And the FTC really care if you lose health data and share health data with somebody. And so these type of organizations, again, had tracking JavaScript on their website.
Right.
That information was sent to third parties. It shouldn't have been. The FTC took action against those organizations. Right. And recently, and you can just use your favorite search engine and type in HHS for Health and Human Services space FTC joint letter. Yep. And they issued a joint letter saying, this is something that if you deal with any healthcare information, protected or not protected, you really need to take some control over. We will take action against you. Right. You have been warned.
And it can result in some pretty hefty settlement amounts and fines. Yep. And then you also add state laws into the mix there, and you lose private information in any way related to health, or it's private information not related to health if you're talking some states. And it can get pretty pricey pretty quickly.
Totally. And if you were in Europe, these obviously would be breaches of the General Data Protection Regulation.
Right.
So these would be they would be very classic GDPR breaches because we do have a universal privacy law in Europe. So those are the health information. Another one that came to light last year was tax information. The companies who do your online tax returns, the three of them, you know their names.
Yeah, we do.
They all had this tracking information, these tracking JavaScript on their websites, and guess what information went to the tracking companies was like your tax return data, which now allows them to do a much better profile of you because they know how much you earn and how much things like that.
Right.
Now, one of the things that was really interesting is when hospitals were talking to HHS, they said, it's okay because Meta discards any healthcare information they get.
No, they don't.
Well, even if they do, it's not it's not their responsibility to get rid of information that you accidentally send them.
But also, how could they possibly get their arms around all? That's nonsense.
Yeah, HHS said just what you said. That's nonsense. So it's not the receiver's responsibility to go, I shouldn't really have that data. I'll throw it away. It's your responsibility if you run a website with these tracking and advertising pixels to make sure that you've configured them correctly and told them what data they can and can't take, and also talk to your marketing and digital departments about it. So those are the two big ways that people are losing data. It's either now. The bar to becoming an advertising and tracking network is quite small. And the bar to getting into the tag manager is quite small. So sometimes that's done by people who actually really want to suck up this data.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's done, sometimes weird things happen that that the developers actually of these JavaScripts actually don't do a very good job. And so there was some research done in Europe, and again, I'll give you the link to the research report, where they were taking usernames and passwords out of input fields because they'd been configured just to take any data out of any input field.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like, whoops. That's not a great thing.
That seems like a problem.
Yeah, and again, if you want to search for the paper online yourself, you search for leaky forms is the name of the paper.
Okay.
And it was about how these tracking networks leak data. But also, and I thought this was quite interesting, a lot of people use A/B testing, right? When they're trying to optimize their website flows. Surprisingly, they take lots of data from forms as well.
Shocker.
So I think my message is, as I've started to get further down what I find this rabbit hole of data leakage from the client browser, is it was much bigger than I thought it was ever going to be. I got into this because of our shared love of PCI DSS and payment data. I used to, in the introduction, I forgot to mention, I used to work for card brands.
Yes.
So, and I was the card brand representative on the PCI working group.
And actually, I think that's why we talked to you before.
That's right. Yeah. And when I was at Visa Europe a long time ago, we just started seeing that people had done what we call this direct post method, where the merchant generated the form for the cardholder data, but the post went off to the payment service provider.
Right.
And the merchants were all going, we don't store, process, or transmit cardholder data.
They still say that.
We don't need to do PCI DSS. And I realized really quickly that this was an attack surface that I just compromise the merchant's website, or there's any JavaScript on that page, you can still get the cardholder data.
Yeah, you can.
So we did some work then at Visa. We wrote some documents about this and tried to educate the market. And since that day, I've been in this like rabbit hole of like, this is a problem we need to deal with.
Yeah.
And we've seen, all the card brands have seen lots of attacks. In fact, skimming attacks now, which is just like a criminal getting some JavaScript onto your web page. Skimming attacks are now the biggest way that websites, the whole industry is losing cardholder data.
Exactly. That's why the big new rules came about.
Yeah.
Because it's such a problem.
It's such a problem. You run a forensics company. You're a forensics team at SecurityMetrics. I know, because I've spoken to this is what they see all day long.
All the time. Yep.
And so let's think about it. We've now got your website that's taking payments, that's putting in JavaScript from, and we did some research at Jscrambler last year about, we did some testing. On average, most websites have 100 different bits of JavaScript on their website.
Yes.
And on average, and there are differences, some people do, some people don't. On average, about half of them come from their own servers. We call that first-party scripts. And half of them come from somebody else's servers, third-party scripts. Could be advertising, it could be tracking, it could be A/B testing, it could be an API to work out shipping costs, it could be all sorts of different things.
Right.
Right. if I as a criminal can compromise any one of those 100 scripts, I can put my skimming stuff there because JavaScript. And this is a real problem with JavaScript as a language. It doesn't have segmentation in it. So if I get some JavaScript running in the browser, I can read any data, I can write any data, I can change the behavior of the form, I can do anything I want effectively, which is why I'm a bit cynical about saying tag managers are random bits of JavaScript from people you've never met and who you really shouldn't trust. Because this is your entire attack surface now.
Yeah.
And I don't think lots of people have worked that out. And so all the large attacks we've seen in the US and in Europe against cardholder data have been these skimming attacks, which is why when the card brands got together to write PCI DSS version 4, and I was part of that at the time. That we wrote 2 new requirements to try and reduce the probability of skimming attacks happening. And I'll be very clear, it's to reduce the probability. No security is perfect. So people say, oh, John, we must block. It's like, it's not a blocking requirement, it's a management requirement. And the requirement's really simple. It just says that you have an inventory, so you know what's
what the scripts are on your page.
And you've made a conscious decision to put them there. There's an authorization process. That authorization could be before the script appears, or it could be if they're all added by marketing, something where you detect a script's appeared straight, and then you say, is this a script we want or not? But you're actively managing it, and you're getting alerts when there are unauthorized scripts. And that's the core of it. And I think that, it's a great thing for payments. I think that should be true for every piece of script on your website.
Absolutely.
If that data is valuable, if any data on forms is valuable to somebody else. So if you have a form on your website and a criminal or a marketing or advertising network could abuse, not often, not intentionally. The marketing website's not doing this. I'm going to be generous of their intent. They're not doing this intentionally, but they get the data that's sent to them, they put it in their database, they do what they do. It's their job. And it's your job to make sure that you understand what you're sending. And at RSA, I gave a keynote on this at RSA, and I think this, we've all put this in this is a bit too hard to fix problem box.
Yeah, and that's a risk, like a real because it is complex and it is massive.
It is.
And just throwing up our hands and saying, oh, well, it's a big problem is not, that isn't going to get us towards a fix. But there are some organizations that are making good strides towards different ways to address this fix. And SecurityMetrics is one of them. So SecurityMetrics has a managed service. And so for organizations that want to manage service on this, SecurityMetrics solution is great. Jscrambler has another solution, and there's another company that we talked to recently called Human that has another way. So there's different ways of dealing with it depending on how you want to approach it. But I would like to hear about how Jscrambler does it, because that might be a different solution for different organizations.
So Jscrambler's got an interesting way of doing it, is we have an agent that loads as the first piece of JavaScript. It has to load as the first piece of JavaScript in your stack. And then it effectively sandboxes all the other JavaScripts that loads. Because JavaScript's what's called a prototype language, but we monkey patch every internal call in the browser. And so if a piece of script says, go and create an iframe, that doesn't go to the browser straight away. It comes to our code that says, is that script allowed to create an iframe? So it's got a rules engine in there. And if a script says, get me the inside value of this form field, which is how you would skim the data out. You'd say, read me the inside value of this ID. Right. That will go to our agent, which will say, is that piece of script allowed to read that data from that form field, or that data from that text you've just put on screen? So if you've put something on screen, if you've shown like the user the balance of their account or their card number or I know some websites can do that. You can see your personal identification number, right? That's not a field. That's just a piece of text, right? But again, if somebody tried to read that, the agent would say, is that script allowed to read that information? So it effectively sandboxes all the other JavaScript on the website.
Oh, very interesting. So I think that some organizations, depending on do they have an internal SOC? Do they have internal people? This might be a solution that they would be more comfortable with rather than having a managed solution.
Totally.
And so as a QSA, one of the things that we're supposed to do is find other solutions and recommend a lot of things, which is why I really wanted to have you talk about that today, because it is very different.
It's a really interesting way of doing it, and it also allows you to. So what I found, and actually what I'm talking about here at the PCI Community Meeting, is I think I was maybe naive about how easy it would be to manage JavaScript. I didn't realize that it had got to the stage now where it's 100 scripts or 200 scripts, or some web engines generate JavaScript automatically on the fly. So it makes managing it really quite complicated.
It is, yeah.
The nice thing with the Jscrambler solution is that you can form fence. So you can say the only thing that's allowed to gain access to these form fields are our own first-party JavaScript. No third-party JavaScript can ever access the booking information on the hospital form. And then it doesn't really matter what marketing do.
Right.
They can add anything to the website, and you know that the protected healthcare information won't leak out. Or if it's on your tax website, you can form fence all the tax information fields, so you can still track the user as a customer.
Right.
And
marketing gets a lot of the information they need, but not the information that they shouldn't have.
Correct. But I would also say that what you want to do if you're in information security is work out how you're going to put your hands around this problem.
Yeah.
The thing that I really like is because these new requirements have appeared in PCI DSS, it's sort of started the market for everyone being a bit more concerned about this.
Right.
So you say human have got products, Source Defense have a product. If you use a content distribution network, if you use Akamai or Cloudflare or Imperva, they've all got solutions that they work differently, but they've got solutions that are trying to address this. I don't think any solution's perfect. I shouldn't say that. The Jscrambler solution is really good. Right, and I'm sure your managed service is really
Absolutely.
good. Right, but
we're perfect.
We're at a fairly beginning stage of as an industry of securing JavaScript in the client browser, and if there's, I know this is a podcast and I'm not on stage giving a presentation, but if there's something I'd like people to take away from the podcast is to think about if they're running websites, whether it's an e-com website or just a booking website or anything. Like, what's your attack surface? How are you managing it?
Exactly. And knowing that what kind of sensitive information is coming through and is a target of these attacks. Because if a lot of times I'll talk to different groups and they'll say, oh, yeah, well, we protect the page in this way. And I'll say, what data comes in? What have you classified the data that comes in? And they'll say, oh, we don't know anything about the data that comes in. And so having a comprehensive end-to-end understanding of what is the data that's being taken in and how is it being protected and in what way is it affected by a standard or a regulation or something that you have to protect it in certain ways.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's easy. You press F12 and go into DevTools and look at how the different sources of JavaScript for your website.
It's a lot.
And you will probably be surprised. I really was surprised.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been great. I know that this is a hot topic right now, and you put a spin on it that we have not had this conversation before. So I really appreciate you coming in and explaining these things in detail to us.
Thanks a lot, Jen. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.